This is a big moment, Rays listeners. That's right. On today's episode, we hosted our first college president, Dan Lugo of Queen's University in Charlotte, North Carolina. Dan has a fascinating personal story that is reflective of some of the truly great aspects of higher education. From his humble beginnings as the youngest of 4 children, Dan is one of the rare advancement leaders who has risen to the highest ranks in our sector. I hope you enjoy learning about his journey. Here we go. Greetings, Rays audience. I am so thrilled to be hosting Dan Lugo, who is the president of Queen's University in Charlotte. This is the first college president that we've hosted on our podcast. I've had the fortune of getting to know Dan over the years, but I cannot overstate how excited I am to learn more about his journey today. Welcome, Dan.
Brent, thank you for having me on. I didn't know that I was your first college president. It's an honor.
Well, I thought if I told you that, then you might be less inclined to accept the invitation. So
you're actually right. You're right.
Yeah. But look, I want to set a little bit of context for the audience. It is March 26, 2020. We are in the midst of rapid response to the COVID-19 coronavirus situation. There are few leaders that have had to embrace as much change as college presidents like Dan have. And so we will absolutely come back and touch on that throughout the course of the conversation. I do want to thank you, Dan, for making time in the midst of everything you've been juggling. That being said, I am so excited to host you today because you have such a unique background as a college president, having worked in a variety of contexts on campus and off, with a very interesting background, and I'm excited to dive into that. Why don't we start though with young Dan Lugo, and could that guy, what was he like, and could he have imagined someday, when you were writing your me book when you were 10 years old, what were you writing about in that book? Where were you, and what were you hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, you're going back in the time machine, and where was I? I'll start with that. So I was actually born in the Virgin Islands. My mom's side of the family is from the VI, and I was born in Christian Saint Croix. My mom and dad had a bit of wanderlust, and I was the youngest of 4. So my older siblings had a much more exotic childhood than I did. But I grew up in a wonderful place out on the South Shore of Long Island named Amityville, New York. Went to 2nd grade in Amityville and graduated from Amityville High School, the public school system that served that district. It was an ideal place for me to grow up. It provided me with opportunities to not only get a strong fundamental education, but to be exposed to the arts. I was a string bass player, be exposed to athletics. I played 3 sports at different times. So I had a really, really kind of idyllic childhood. What I didn't have was a lot of folks around me with experience of having gone to college or to having become professionals. So I'm a first-generation college attender, and I'm among those 4 kids, the only one that went to college. And as a result, there was an expectation in my household for whatever reason that I was going to go. My parents are incredibly brilliant people. They're both still alive, but getting up there. But the expertise of how to do it and what careers to do. So I had those kind of generic career thoughts. So maybe I'd be a doctor.
Can I just ask at that point? I also, I'm the oldest of 3 boys, first generation college student, and share the view. My parents just never had that opportunity, but it was always an expectation. I do think it's extra unique that as the youngest of 4, you were the one to be able to have that opportunity. At what point was that expectation different for you?
Yeah, I don't know that it was ever different, to be quite honest with you. I think part of being a bit of an extracurricular greedy kid, I was always involved in the arts at a high level and sports at a competitive level. So I was always looking at, what do you do next with those types of things? In particular sports, I was watching, college football. So I knew all of those big universities and could envision myself being in the stands or being on those campuses. So I don't know that there was ever a switch. I've always had work has always been a part of my life too. I think I was in 7th grade when I got my paper route, and pretty much since being 12 or 13 to now, I've worked, my whole entire life. But never did I think that I would skip going to college versus going directly to work. So I don't have that kind of light switch moment. It was always an issue of confusion about what does that mean and where do you do that?
And so help me understand, as you're now navigating high school, sports, the arts, were there certain teachers or counselors or coaches who started helping you shape what would ultimately be your college decision?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And in my story, at every interval up until the most recent interval, penultimate moment in my career, there have been mentors. There have been people that have either quietly or more strongly in my life giving me advice. And in high school, I went to a really great community high school where I think socioeconomic challenges were a lot more present than I ever felt when I was a kid. But now when I look back, I kind of get it a lot more. And so the percentage, had a major graduation issue. The percentage of students that went to college was low. And there was a sense of, whatever that cohort that they thought had the potential to go to college, they wanted to ensure that group kind of got there. And some people that I would highlight were, kind of a junior high math teacher that for some reason saw real potential in me. And I was a smart kid, and I could get by with doing not a lot of work, at least in that environment, right? That all changed when I got to college, which we can talk about, the virtual punch in the mouth. But through high school, I could really navigate without, keep staying looking cool, right? Without carrying a lot of books and doing all of that stuff. And there were some great teachers, in particular, a math teacher named Mr. Edwards that called me on that. And then I would really highlight a teacher named Mr. Schwartzman, who was my orchestra teacher. And candidly, I would say he opened up my life, period. He opened up my life. I was a violinist in 4th and 5th grade and early junior high. And he said, Dan, you're going to be a big guy. You should be a string bass player. And I said, I don't want to do that. He's like, the girls like string bass players, Dan. I said, okay, I'll do that. And that one decision, allowed me to find an instrument that I would thrive in, allowed me to get into a regional orchestra that in all 3 years of my high school experience took me around the world. I took a world tour in Europe and Asia and South America.
Wow.
And I think that literally defined who I would become, defined my curiosity and my thirst to really understand this planet, to understand people, and to navigate cultures and difference.
Incredible. And so you ended up attending Carleton College in Minnesota. Like most people who are born in Saint Croix and grow up on Long Island, you turned to Central Minnesota for education. No culture shock whatsoever when you got out there.
Actually, massive culture shock, and I take your humor because it wasn't a real typical path.
Unfortunately, just as a point of context, I grew up in Northeast Iowa, not far from Luther College, so
yep.
In the same cultural neck of the woods.
Understood, and Decorah and that region I really love, and I love those North Central Plains states. I find myself to be very much an adoptive Minnesotan, but it wasn't the tried and true path for.
I mean, you're in Amityville. Nobody knows what Carleton College is, and so how do you go from 4 or 5,000 potential paths for higher education? How did you start narrowing it down? Was it about the arts or sports or a combination? And how did Carleton find you?
Yeah, so now that I've been on the other side and I've been a chief enrollment officer, I understand the magic that generated me, and it's actually not magic; it's just great admissions work. Carleton, basic strategy in the 80s and 90s was to be the first communicator to top whatever students they were looking for around the country based on their kind of PSAT searches. And the first piece of mail that I got in Amityville, Long Island was from Carleton College. I had never heard of the place. I didn't know a thing about Northfield, Minnesota. And the only thing I knew about Minnesota in general was that I was a Rod Carew fan for the Minnesota Twins. And the Vikings, had a really good defensive line, at that point in time. So it really didn't stand out at the start, but because they were first, they became kind of the yardstick by which I measured other communications. I'm really somewhat ashamed to say I'm a cautionary tale, even though it worked out. In my college search, I didn't visit a single school. The only college campus that I actually ever spent any time on was C.W. Post in Long Island, because that's where the Long Island Youth Orchestra used to rehearse. But otherwise, I went to Carleton sight unseen, and it was completely because of the quality of their communications and the great admission work that they did. I did have a chance to be interviewed by an alumna in New York City and went to kind of a gathering. And for some reason, I just felt this affinity with the more humble personality. They seemed more interested in me and my potential and my future, regardless of whether I went to their school or not. Where some of the other gatherings I went to, it was kind of like, oh, how could you turn us down? Of course you want to come with us.
Yeah.
And that really stood out.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind me sharing, one of my memories, which links back to Minnesota, is the first school that I got called by from a recruiting perspective on the East Coast was Brown University. And I really hadn't heard of Brown. And in fact, when they first called and said they were from Brown, I immediately assumed it was the Brown Institute of Technology in Minneapolis, because they were doing so much TV advertising in my local market, and that was kind of my first impression as well. So all that being said, you moved to Carleton, and
Brent, I've got a question. So I had an experience where when I got into Carleton, I said, hey, I'm going to Carleton, because it had such low name recognition.
Yeah,
people were like a little disappointed, like, why didn't you pick X, Y, or Z? Did you have that same experience about Brown in Iowa?
Well, let me tell you what really helped counter that potential was I graduated. I was a senior in 1999, which is when Varsity Blues was released, and Johnny Moxon, the star quarterback at the end of Varsity Blues, commits to Brown University, which really put it on the map for my my peer group.
There you go.
Otherwise, who knows? So you moved to Minnesota. Were the arts or athletics going to be a part of your collegiate experience as well?
Yeah, so the arts continued. I continued to perform and study string bass, at least for the first 3 years that I was at Carleton. Athletics kind of fell off, and we all have these kind of back of the mind lists of biggest regrets. And that's on my list. The fact that I chose not to continue to compete. But every year that I get past that, the regret feels a little less painful. So I've only got about 20 more years before it's totally benign for me.
What's interesting is that one of my regrets is I love playing guitar. I love singing. And I really regret not trying to do a cappella or something in the arts. Instead, I played football. So we can both, share those counterbalancing regrets over the next 20 years for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Carleton was a good experience for you.
Carleton was a challenging experience for me. Amityville High School was a very, very diverse place. And in fact, it was a school where the majority of the students were African American. It was probably 60% African American and 40% white at that time. It was a bit of a magic moment in the school district where those communities got along really well. And my understanding is that it wasn't exactly that case years before me, and it's evolved in ways where it continues not to be that case. But I was there in this kind of really magical moment. And, you know, I went to southern Minnesota. I went to Northfield, great two-college town. And at that time, you know, with fewer than 10% of the students being of all types of domestic ethnic minorities, and a very, very small African-American community. And I really, even though
I just ask, I mean, what was your class size and how many African Americans were in your class?
gosh, and you know, and I'm sorry, I don't know that number off of the top of my head, but I think the class sizes were around 400 at that point in time. So, you know, if you thought that everyone in that class, you know, if 10% of them were domestic students of color, that's 40, and if a small percentage of that was African American, you can see how quickly those numbers get very, very small. And being in the Great Northern Plains, didn't really have a lot of the comforting surroundings that I was used to. Really beautiful place, really exciting traditions, but just different. So really kind of getting used to that new culture was a bit of a challenge, and all trying to, you know, my MO is to always make things look like, you know, I'm pretty fluid and I'm adapting and I'm cool. So, you know, keeping the challenges inward while managing actual real challenges became an even bigger challenge. So I would say that I had a great curricular and academic experience at Carleton, but it became truly my community deep into my junior year, where somewhat of a switch flipped for me, where I kind of took ownership for the way that I was engaging with that community. And was I really giving fully of myself? Was I really committing to the friendships that I was making there? Was I committing to actually having fun there versus almost self-isolating myself and putting myself on the periphery of the experience? And I think once I reoriented that and put myself at the front of my own narrative, it's amazing how many things really opened up for me there. And as a result, Carleton was a very, very much a defining experience. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but I credit Carleton with kind of, you know, rescuing me on a number, on at least two occasions, right? So the first was bringing me to Carleton to get the type of immersive liberal arts, great community experience that I had. And the second time, you know, I left a profession to get into higher education and went back to my alma mater and started to work there. So I owe quite a bit to Carleton.
Well, I definitely want to learn about that part of the journey. You studied political science, and then, which would be a fairly, you know, one of the more common paths, you pursued your JD, but you felt connected enough to the great state of Minnesota to head up to the Twin Cities and go to the University of Minnesota. Was that a tough decision, or what kind of led you to say, okay, I figured out this whole Midwestern thing. I've really immersed myself and figured that out midway through the junior year. Let's go all in on Minnesota here for a few more years.
I think that would have been the better movie script, but unfortunately, that's not the reality. When I graduated on that second Saturday in June of 1991, sorry, 1991, and drove home across the country, I thought for sure that Minnesota was in the rearview mirror. I was actually destined at that point in time to go to Boston University Law School. And I was going to be rendezvousing with a childhood friend who I grew up with in Amityville to go to that same exact school. I got home to New York City, and I got a call from an admissions person at the University of Minnesota Law School who said something to the effect of, "Hey, we haven't heard your response to, you know, our Royal A. Stone Scholarship offer that we've been." And I said, "You know, I moved out a few weeks ago and I haven't gotten a response. Can you explain what that opportunity is?" And the opportunity was persuasive enough for me to tell my childhood good friend that, "Hey, I can't believe I'm abandoning you, but for financial reasons, I'm going to go to the University of Minnesota Law School and head back across the country." That experience in those 3 years were really interesting for me. I really didn't fall in love with with law school, but I definitely fell in love with the university, the state. From that perspective, I saw a slice of the Midwest in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the Twin Cities that really resonated with me. And, you know, one of the challenges of being a first generation college tender is you become a first generation college graduate, you become a first generation person to go to graduate school, you know, so you continue not to have those types of peer influences to really communicate about what you're observing and getting good advice about what to do next. And so I really wasn't the biggest fan of law school, but you know, I'm a pretty stick to it, stubborn guy, and you know, not only got through those 3 years of law school, but you know, managed to take on internships and clerkships, and started working, you know, for a law firm during my third year at law school, and never really paying attention to the ways that it actually wasn't fundamentally resonating with my values, with the things that I wanted to do with my life and with my strengths, but really just kind of plowing forward.
Can I just ask, I mean, it's a little bit personal, but how much pressure did you feel to just need to make money? I mean, just given the reality, obviously, it sounds like with Minnesota, you had you know, another great enrollment experience where they really fought for you as a student, and at the same time, when you think about, I don't know, the pursuit of your values, juxtaposed with just a need as a first gen, you know, student to make money. I mean, did you feel that pressure?
Yeah, you know, and I still do, to be quite honest with you. This is, you know, the pressure to build a career pathway that addressed my own financial insecurity, the financial insecurity of you know, my family and parents. That was kind of always present for me in
Yeah.
all of the decisions that I made. How do I, one, not be a burden and not require significant family investment, and two, how do I put myself on a pathway where I can be a revenue source for the people that I love? You know, that's been present with me forever, and continues to be. Just a part of the definition of what makes me tick. So that I think was part of the stubbornness of no, because if I stepped off of the path, you know, because I wasn't enjoying law school, then you get into, you know, something that just really I couldn't define of how could I, you know, ensure that I wouldn't be a burden, and how could I just, you know, also ensure that in at least in a couple of years I'd be a net contributor to the family and community that I love.
I feel that for sure. And that being said, you did go down the path to become an attorney, and you did, it at least looks like, weave in some of your interest in the arts and
Yeah.
music into that work. Tell me more about your time as an entertainment lawyer in Manhattan, right? And
Correct.
specifically, I want to know some of the favorite memories you have, some of the people you interacted with during that time that maybe still stand out.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. So I would say that it started out to be really an entertainment and sports attorney.
Okay.
I reconnected with my childhood friend who did go to BU Law School and graduate, and I went to University of Minnesota Law School. And you know, we grew up in the arts together. I mentioned, you know, my passion for athletics. I had the good fortune of growing up with a couple people that ended up having careers in the arts, as well as who ended up playing some pro sports. So I grew up with a guy named Rob Carpenter, who was a co-captain on our football team, who went to Syracuse as a great wide receiver over there and became, you know, he was drafted by the Bengals, played for the Patriots, played for the Jets. I grew up with, you know, the guys in De La Soul. For anyone from our generation, remember kind of those guys who by the way, are still out there, still performing. And so I thought, you know, that I had gateways into those professional communities. And so How do I feed a little bit of my passion for those areas by staying adjacent to them, perhaps providing legal services and agency services? To be quite honest with you, I actually love talking about failures because when I talk in particular to all students and most definitely first generation students, they feel like they need to keep stacking these perfect boxes on top of each other. And if the box isn't perfect, oh my gosh, I'm off the path. And I think I thought that way too. But the reality of our lives is that we just keep failing and failing, and the smart and tough people just keep getting up to fail again. And that's really the definition of how you become successful. So I actually started out with a deeper emphasis in sports. Did pick up a few clients as a certified National Basketball Players Association rep, as an NFL Players Association rep. And I'm telling you, those were some painful moments when you're sitting there with the starting safety for LSU who led the team in tackles, and he doesn't get his name called, and you're there with his whole family, on draft day.
So you're that guy. If there is a draft, or the next time we watch the draft, they zoom in on the player's face. You're the guy right next to that person.
Exactly.
Was this like ballers before it was a thing, kind of? I mean, is that the world you were in?
Entertaining show, good show to watch when on the elliptical or something like that. Keeps you driving there. But there's a lot of
maybe was there a little Jerry Maguire? Maybe that's a better
Jerry Maguire was successful until he wrote that memo, right? So I actually never had the joy of becoming successful. I had, one of my most memorable moments is having a really talented 7'1" player who had been playing overseas, and everyone was excited to come back, and setting up a workout in Chicago, right around the Moody Bible Institute, where they used to do the NBA draft camps, and having quite a good show of folks in the general manager and scouting community come over and then have my client not show up, like literally skip the exercise, and to have the logo, AKA Jerry West, say, "Dan, thanks for wasting my time."
Tough.
So, those are parts of the story that I think people need to know as you kind of build your passions in your career. On the entertainment side, I had the good fortune of working with a number of folks that had some success in hip hop, a couple of producers. I worked with an interesting group named Public Enemy, and became very, very good friends with its leader and front person, Chuck D. We continue to be friends until this day. And I had a really mixed experience of working in-house, of working for a boutique, entertainment firm on 57th Street. By the way, I got fired from that job. So another great story there. But, you meet a lot of really, really interesting people, whether it's Patti LaBelle or Art Garfunkel or Lauryn Hill. You get some nice backstage passes, but at the end of the day, it was entertaining. But for me to have had the success that I would have wanted to have had, I would have really had to have compromised on my values. I would have had to have compromised on the dedication and commitment that I would have had towards my family. And so, it just really kind of wasn't destined to be. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit of a slow learner, so I did it for 9 years. So that took some time.
At what point, okay, you're on that path, you've got maybe in the back of your mind some questions, you have some failures that you go through. You still, I guess from my vantage point, you don't envision that the next step would be to move back to Carlston and join the admissions office. So there's a lot that has to happen to go from questioning the path to moving into higher ed admissions. So what's the story there? Did they recruit you again? I mean, how did that happen?
Yeah, great question. And it is a more complex and complicated answer, and I'll try and not unthread,
because we might have a couple of entertainment or sports attorneys listening. I mean, maybe one. So you're really speaking to that person right now.
There are a lot of attorneys that do get into higher education. There's no question about it. I don't know how many from the entertainment field, but definitely a bunch that do get into education. Over that 9-year period of time, I was doing a lot of self-reflection. At that point in time, I had a network of friends and colleagues and people that I could really ask them about their careers. I was looking for different pathways to other possibilities, but I had stayed connected to Carleton as an alumnus and as a volunteer. I volunteered with the admissions office at Carleton, and so I was the guy that, believe it or not, would make some time to go to a college fair in New York City. I was the guy that would interview applicants coming out of New York City, and so I got exposed to that work.
And did it? I'm guessing it just felt great.
It did, actually. When I kind of took inventory of my life, and I was like, what are the parts of my life that I really, really enjoy? For some reason, I enjoyed speaking with really, really bright students, who had a world of opportunities there for them, that were just so turned on to learn. And I was turned on to tell them about this great place that I was connected to and how it might have been a possibility for their next step. So I enjoyed doing that. And here comes another, mentor name, a gentleman by the name of Paul Thibodeau, who was the longstanding vice president and dean of admissions and financial aid at Carleton College. In fact, arrived there the year that I graduated, the year that I enrolled, 1987. At Carleton, and just retired last year.
Wow.
So through that volunteer work, he became quite a mentor to me in talking about, hey, by the way, there's some opportunities for folks with your skill set in higher ed, and maybe you should consider them. And I spent literally about 2 years exploring some development jobs, some admissions jobs. And, you eventually have to kind of throw your hat over the fence and chase it. And with a lot of uncertainty behind that decision, it was risky, but turned out to be the best decision that I ever made.
So you show up as the assistant dean of admissions in 2004 and spend 7 years at Carleton. And you did some time in admissions. You did have a quick pivot over into the development world, and then ultimately it created opportunities for you to take leadership roles elsewhere. Anything stand out as being a favorite moment or something really memorable during your time back at Carleton?
Oh, well, all of it. The experience of going back to your alma mater to work as an alumnus is really quite interesting, right? Because you have this kind of either jaded or idyllic viewpoint of, perhaps you're like, oh, it's all about the money, or, oh, it was so pristine that it's perfect. And there's a risk when you go back as an alumnus, because you actually get to see the sausage being made. And one of the things that happened for me, and going to an incredible place like Carleton, I really saw what a calling working in higher education was. Every single day, the faculty and staff at that institution, they wake up and they do their jobs, and they obsess about how much they care about the student experience, right? That is really the driver. And that was what was missing for me in my law career. The driver in my law career was, is this deal going to make money? Is this talented person, do they have the potential to make money? And every day, the decisions, the work that the professionals that worked at Carleton was all about how do we ensure that everything that we do makes the student experience great. And that really resonated deeply with me. I found a home. To be quite honest with you, while my extended family, not my immediate family, had incredible support from my wife to make that move. She was pregnant, but my wife is from Brooklyn, right? We had a daughter, and she was pregnant. So it was the perfect time, right, to take a, let's say, 6-figure cut and bring a Brooklynite to Northfield, Minnesota.
Zero risk
right?
whatsoever. Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't plan that any better. You know, that was just spot on. But I had incredible support. And that first job as an assistant dean of admission literally was probably the most fun that I've ever had. I
Can
mean,
can I ask,
until recently.
did you did any other kids from Amityville and Long Island end up making it out to Carleton during your time, or
Yeah,
nearby schools?
I see where you're going, and because I tried, and unfortunately, I remain the only kid to have gone to Carleton from Amityville High School. That's not a badge or a trophy that I'm proud of. We did get some other Long Island students. In particular, the closest we got was a young woman from Copiague, Long Island, which is a neighboring town. But that entry into higher ed was fantastic. Getting both exposure. Carleton was launching the public phase of a campaign. So being able to transition into being a development officer and to handle a traditional portfolio, the travel, the cultivation, the frequent meetings, everything about that work was really fantastic. And then to come back to the admission side in a more senior leadership role was a perfect platform for the next moves that I made in my career.
And I do think one of the dynamics that folks have to wrestle with in higher education is that oftentimes, I mean, it's great when you can start at an institution and work your way straight up the org chart, but that's pretty rare. And oftentimes folks have to move a fair amount geographically with young families to really pursue professional growth and opportunity. You did that, and you joined Franklin and Marshall College to really take a leadership role, dean of admissions and financial aid. That had to be a tough decision. Maybe it wasn't, but it sort of comes with the territory in most situations if you want to really pursue leadership opportunities in higher ed. You have to be opportunistic. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's right. Most folks that are doing good work in higher ed want to stay, right? Most leaders that are vice presidents and a part of the senior leadership team and enjoying their work, they Paul Thibodeau really blessed Carleton College with an incredible career, and I knew that he wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, as he should not have. And so you do get into a position if you want to move up the career path that you have to be able to go to a different institution. And that was an important test for me, right? It was one thing to recruit and raise funds for my alma mater, a place that I love so deeply. And could I do that with equal passion for institutions that I didn't go to? And I felt pretty confident that I could. The opportunity to join a senior leadership team at Franklin and Marshall with an incredible and inspiring president in Dan Porterfield, who I had so much respect for, and his mission to really change the conversation around recruitment of students from socioeconomically challenged backgrounds. His philosophy that I broadly subscribe to, that talent isn't resident in only certain zip codes, and that it is actually much more evenly spread than economic opportunity. And to share in leading that mission as we built a talent initiative that strengthened that college and its student body, it was really fantastic work to do. And I fell in love with Franklin and Marshall. I fell in love with that community, its students, its faculty, its alumni, and it was really telling to me that was possible, right? That shared mission of education, of transforming lives, is being done by so many institutions, and it was an open door for me to work at several different places.
Well, and I'm also curious. I imagine when you're so personally and professionally connected with the alma mater, and also not in the kind of absolute leadership role, getting the opportunity to go somewhere else with a bit more of a clean slate, maybe more of a mandate to really take a swing, had to be interesting. And I think when I don't know as much about the enrollment world. Jim Nondorf at the University of Chicago has been a longtime friend and mentor. Um, there are a handful of people, he's on that list, who have really had rapid, quantifiable success stories that others have looked to. And just the punchline on it, you can give me more of the background, but there was, my understanding is, a 45% increase in applications to Franklin and Marshall over a pretty compressed time period. And um, the institution had been around for a long time. I doubt that you launched a whole bunch of new programs overnight. So my sense is there had to be some sort of playbook that you either had wanted to run at Carleton, but maybe didn't have the full mandate, or that you developed somewhere along the way. But when did you feel like there was really an opportunity to have sort of a transformational impact, not just you, but your whole team? But what was kind of the playbook that you ran?
Yeah, and you're kind of put me in the same sentence with Jim Nondorf, who is definitely an enrollment revolutionary at the University of Chicago. But I would say that they're really, and I'm just making this up right now, there are kind of two things that I may have had in common with him, which was a deep belief in the power of data, a deep belief. I'm going to say three things. A deep belief in the fact that there are way more students that would be interested in the experience of our institutions than have knowledge about who our institutions are. And it is our job, not their job, to educate them, right? And then there's a real commitment to the philosophy of why not? We oftentimes, admire things that we assume that always need to be. Well, we've always been like that. Well, we've never done well there, or I don't think we've ever seen a student from X, Y, or Z. And I'm a fan of saying, why not? Why not? Why wouldn't we, really pay more attention? And then, Carleton's a big part of that story too, because one of the exciting things about Carleton is it's one of those places, it's got a little bit of Garrison Keillor, Lake Wobegon. They just do everything well, and so I learned about these best practices, from Paul Thibodeau and others about how do you just kind of really, your X's and O's in enrollment management and leadership are always keeping pace with the best practices, and then seasoning that in with my own obsession with why not and data, and really just kind of driving the message of what a great place Franklin and Marshall is. And then to add in a component of how do we work with so many great community-based organizations that are working across the country to identify and to support brilliant young students that are underserved potentially in their community schools, but have a wealth of potential for great colleges and universities. And I think that's how we were able to transform our practices and transform the audience of students that knew about us and that would be excited about us. And that took some time. It took quite a bit of intentional hard work. That was a team effort. It sure wasn't me. And that admissions team, I think, really did a stellar job of lining up all of those practices, staying committed to spreading the word, and never really admiring a barrier, and just really kind of breaking through.
I'm wondering if your commitment to why not also is the only common thread in your career path, because what you don't expect is for somebody to help lead an admissions transformation, enrollment transformation, achieve that kind of growth, and then join an advancement shop as a leader at Colby College. So maybe this why not thread is the common piece of the story. What leads you then, now that you've got this playbook? The logical thing would be, let's go run it somewhere else. But instead you decided to go help spin up the largest capital campaign in liberal arts history, if I'm not mistaken. Or one of them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the philosophy of why not, even though I just made it up, maybe actually rings true. Um, I had the best admissions job in the country, working with Dan Porterfield in a community that understood the mission really, really well. Things were going well. So I certainly wasn't interested in going anywhere else to take on, an admissions job. But what I was interested in, becoming increasingly more interested in, was the long-term possibility of becoming a college or university president. I not only became.
Was there a moment, like, was there somebody you met or a session you attended where you started thinking, hey, I might be able to do that, or I would love to do that?
Yeah, this is a mentorship story, and I'd have to give all credit to Dan Porterfield, who saw a lot of potential in me, and also started exposing me to different elements of higher education leadership, expanding the portfolio of things that I was invited to in terms of the leadership discussions and decision making, and then just being at the senior leadership table. At a great place, for me was inspiring. And to this day, I mean, that's the work that I love most, is when you see all of those leaders come together and we can play in each other's pools, right? And we can help each other out. That's where, my thirst to learn was really, really turned on. Those weekly meetings that, if you really only care about your lane, I would imagine those weekly meetings can be, tough, right? 2 or 3 hours, really focused on a lot of things that you might think of as not yours.
Mm.
From day one, I felt like they were all mine, right? And I was always listening to, how can I help that? How can I be of assistance? Or what can I learn there? And then, just working with Dan Porterfield was an inspirational thing for me, to think of the possibility of the ways that I could shape an institution. So it started pretty early on, and I wasn't going to take a sabbatical and research a number of things and write a book and then come back and teach. So I knew that I was going to have to put together a non-traditional portfolio. So when the opportunity came, and I had conversations with another absolute visionary president in David Green, and he knew exactly, David's a guy that understands people in the most interesting ways, and gets to the core of what motivates folks really, really quickly. He understood my motivations and said, candidly, we can get you on the path to being competitive for a great presidency one day. And the path is to mastering this other side of the revenue house, which was to be a chief development officer. And I knew that made sense, and he knew that made sense. And so it was a really difficult decision, because I loved the work, and I loved the community, and I loved my boss at Franklin and Marshall. But I felt really, compelled to take that leap, to say why not, and to jump in with both feet into leading an exciting shop at an exciting time with a leader that I knew was going to really fight for the resources that we need to do big things, and who was going to be a champion for fundraising, alumni engagement, and using that as a vehicle to change and really improve the slope of a fantastic institution.
And so you made the move to Waterville, Maine, another big move. The family is thrilled to go to Waterville. They're just rolling with the changes. And you launch one of the most well-branded, I think, capital campaigns that I've been a part of, or that I've been exposed to, Dare Northward. I love that from the time that you all announced it. And I also will say, you have been fairly public on platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter, which I think is still not that common for development professionals, advancement leaders. And I'm curious if there was a moment where you felt like not only kind of the institutional branding and the broad communications, but that you, Dan, were going to build your own kind of social and professional identity and put yourself out there a little bit on some of those social platforms that can be scary.
Yeah, there are several things that, kind of make me tick. And one of them is technology and communications. And I've been an early adopter for, different social media community platforms since their release. And I feel like I require a lot of my teammates and how everyone becomes a storyteller. And I feel like I have to model that behavior. Luckily, I enjoy it. I really don't do it grudgingly. How can I use whatever role that I'm in? And it might be a small audience, but the power of social media is that, hey, if it hits a nerve and resonates with a number of people, it gets syndicated, right? It has really an opportunity for some viral growth. And it's been fun to see which of those stories, that I champion have that opportunity. But it's impossible for me to really, in my opinion, really drive someone else towards that work if I don't embrace it myself. And there are risks with that. Luckily, I don't think that I've really stubbed my toe on anything. And I understand what my channel is and what it's about and what the stories are that I should be talking about. And it's tough to thread that needle where you don't seem like a shill, right? Purely for marketing reasons, but there's some authenticity and some insight into who is the person that is telling those stories. And I wish I was better. I wish I was as good as you are at doing that, but I love learning. I love getting better at that type of work. And it's been a part of the toolkit that I continue to use.
Well, look, I think it does compound over time. Like, I'm not sure that if you weren't that public, that when we were thinking about who would be great guests for this podcast, that your name would have immediately come to mind. So I think there is something where these little things do compound, and maybe someday, a year from now, somebody will Google your name, come across this podcast, listen to it, and apply for a job at Queens that they otherwise might not have applied for. And so it's sort of not just going to be an overnight thing, which is where I feel like inertia is powerful. And if you're not moving, it's hard to start. But as you start to just get comfortable with it, and that's been hard for me too. I mean, I'm like, we've learned a lot over the last 10 years of starting this company, but there's definitely been these moments of like, who am I to say how somebody should be doing advancement? I haven't necessarily done that work, or how do I sort of balance that humility with also wanting to have a point of view and being willing to put forth new ideas. And so I commend you on frankly giving me and others a window into your world at Colby and now in your current role at Queens. And I actually wonder, even when you think about building the quote unquote portfolio as a leader today, does that matter to whoever the selection committee was to ultimately make the offer for you to join Queens as president? That kind of thing probably matters to them as well. Like, is this guy going to be accessible and available to our community through these new digital mediums? Maybe it doesn't matter that much, but I'm curious if it's come up at all.
I think it does. I mean, I think it does matter. And clearly the search for the Queen's president was incredibly professionally done. It was a fantastic search committee. It was, staffed by a national, leader in presidential searches. So they knew what I was doing out there. I don't think we had a very intentional conversation about that. But what they could feel was that college presidents are college presidents 24 hours a day. And it's interesting. I feel sometimes it's helpful for me now as a college president, but I feel like I've always been wired like that, right? That has been a part of my personality. And my wife kind of knew this about me way back when we made the decision 16 years ago to get into higher education and to leave New York. I was commuting into New York City from Montclair, New Jersey, taking a train. It was, an hour commute or so back and forth. And when we moved to Northfield, I had an assumption that we would live in the Twin Cities because I've got this urbanite, wife, and I would continue to do the commuting. And she said, heck no. I know you. You think it was because you were a lawyer that you worked forever and worked hard. It's because you like to work. You're a workaholic. And we're gonna live close. We're gonna live in Northfield. And at every position that I've had, whether it was Carleton, F&M, now at Queens, I am always less than a 5-minute commute from home. So, if I'm putting in a 12-hour day, if I'm there from 8 to 8, I get home at 8:05, right? Which gives me the opportunity to, be fully engaged with my second obsession, which is my family, right? If we had a commute in there, that just wouldn't work. So I've always been wired to kind of carry, to be mission centered. I have a hard time turning off, the things that I'm passionate about, and I think part of that openness towards communicating about the mission, about my passions in social media relate to that. And so, yes, maybe that does, people can see through that. They can see, hopefully the search committee saw that this is a guy that will really embody this role and not run from it, right? That will enjoy the aspects of taking that on, in the 24-hour type of role that it is.
I love it. I have to ask, I do wonder, so when you're in the Dare Northward campaign in particular, one of the things that fascinates me about the two sides of the revenue house, as you described it, is I love learning from enrollment leaders because the rapid pace in enrollment is unparalleled. You go back to zero at the end of each cycle, and you've got really this compressed time period, which is why I do feel like there's been a lot of innovation around data in the enrollment space. Yesterday, I interviewed for the podcast Matthew Lambert, who's the vice president for university advancement at William and Mary. And he talked about how on the advancement side, they think about creating 80-year relationships. So like you might get 8 months on the enrollment side of things. You literally have 80 years on the advancement side of the house. And you jumped to that side in leading the campaign at Colby. And I'm just curious along the way, like, was the pace different, or how do you feel about that 8-month cycle versus 80-year cycle? And then the other thing I want to ask is, I would imagine the background as an entertainment lawyer, where you're dealing with high profile, high net worth people, negotiating complex transactions, was probably pretty useful when you started working on some of those gift agreements. Is that fair? Maybe not.
I've always, so part of, I think what that actually is less the facility of being with high net worth folks. I enjoy being with creative people and learning about them. And at its core, that's what great development work is how much do you enjoy about learning about what makes people tick, what makes them excited, what are their values, what do they want to get done in the world? And then to connect those with the mission of your institution. I love that work. I love people, and I love hearing their stories. You won't be able to tell on this podcast because I'm talking a lot, but I actually love to listen. I just love to listen closely. And candidly, in development work, the less you're talking and the more they're listening, the more they're giving you the keys, to their kingdom in many ways. And so that was also something that I think was helpful in working in the entertainment business, but not as much as you might think. That being said, maybe if you can kind of refresh me on the first part of the question.
The pace, the 8-month enrollment kind of cycle you really get versus the 80 years, and does that result in a different approach to data and digital media, for example, on the enrollment side, where you really have no choice versus advancement, I think that's one of the areas that we've been championing. But at the end of the day, if the top 2 or 3% of your supporters are contributing 90% of the revenue, do you really need a great Facebook strategy to do that? Probably not, because those are 80-year relationships or 50-year relationships. But for that middle of the pyramid or bottom of the pyramid, it has always felt to us like that's where advancement could learn a lot from the enrollment world.
Yeah. Well, I would say that yes, the very data was important to both roles, and one of the things that I'm excited about that's helped me to execute at both chief enrollment and chief advancement officer roles is that I've had a kind of partner in crime in that work at both places, right? So and he continues to be with me currently as our vice president for strategic planning. For and that would be a gentleman by the name of Rich Majerus, who was.
And I would just say, if you're listening and you're interested in data, either for advancement enrollment in general, Google Rich. He's done a really nice job putting forth a lot of his learnings very openly and publicly. We've learned a lot from him at Evertrue, and I'm glad that you gave him a shout out.
Yeah, no. My pleasure, because he's a big part of my success. And the stories that we've been able to, create together. In admissions, that cyclical nature really puts, I think, everyone on a balanced playing field, and the folks that can really take advantage of data to make an impact in the pipeline in literally, 2 or 3 year kind of windows have the best opportunities. And segmentation is getting to be a lot more possible, but the richness of the data that you can get in advancement is so much stronger, and it is because of the length of connection that these folks have to the institution. It does have to do with what's available publicly to learn more about individuals. But I would also say is that I didn't have the luxury, and I didn't want to work at a place where the focus was only on the top 2%. And that's not the out that David Green gave our advancement team. We had to be great at everything. We had to have incredible success in building up our annual fundraising, small donations, working with millennial and post-millennial generations, and to have incredible success at those mid-tier early leadership gifts, and to really be building that top 2% of the pyramid. And we were able to do that, and we held ourselves to that standard of excellence, literally, because that was the requirement. That's what we owed the institution, and that's what we thought the Dare Northward campaign could be about, because Dare Northward to Colby is about everyone pursuing, their best selves. And that really influenced everything that we did. But one thing that I would highlight in between the two jobs, admissions work, it's an incredibly pressure-filled job, especially if you're at a tuition revenue dominant institution. Bringing in that class, ensuring that it's heading in the right trajectory and it has the right financial elements to it is a tough job. But it's forgiving. Here's where it's forgiving. Once you do that, next year you get kind of a clean slate, right? Yep. The challenge in advancement is you are talking about 20, 40, 60-year relationships. And whether you caused a problem in that relationship or not, you own it. Right. And so you are inheriting folks who have had a 20-year, 40-year relationship with an institution. And you know what? Data is not always going to be the answer to getting you past that. Building relationships, showing how much you authentically care about those individuals and care about the things that are passionate to them, really telling the story about how the core values of an institution remain the same, even as the tactics and some of the audience and the student body has evolved, is really tough work, right? There aren't particularly great algorithms that do that work. And it takes people to do that. It takes people that are passionate about that work to get that done.
Well, let's talk about now in your presidential role, you're about 9 months in.
Is
And
that it?
I believe it or not, I double checked the math. It's 9 months, and you've got to build relationships in just a normal context with faculty, with current students, with prospective students, with parents, with alumni. Not that you're going to build individual relationships with everyone, but you and your team has to manage that. And even in a normal order of business, that would be, I think, somewhat overwhelming. I'm sure enjoying it, but at the same time, we are now in the midst of this COVID-19 coronavirus situation where everything has sort of, all plans have been thrown out the window, and within a 10 or 20 day period, we've probably forced 10 or 20 years of change into the higher ed sector. You've had to help, uh, first and foremost, take care of your students, take care of your employees at the university, spin up online education. And so when you talk about all leaders coming together and not having people just stay in their lane, I would imagine this has been a really uh, stressful but perhaps unifying period. And I'd love just a window into what it's like trying to navigate that, where you don't necessarily have a mentor you can turn to for advice about how they handled this. I mean, you and I think anybody in leadership position right now, you're becoming the leaders that others are going to be asking about this period for the rest of time, frankly. So how how have you navigated that? How is your team holding up? Probably too early to say have you learned any lessons, but what stands out?
Yeah, appreciate the moment that we're in, and Brent, you lead a team too, and I, my thoughts are with you as you lead for your team, as you have to virtualize things and you have to ensure that there's a continuing business that puts food on the table for the families, and that you take care of your clients, all the while really taking care of your own family. And I come to this moment realizing that that's all of our challenge right now. It's we all are in this moment, not only as professionals but as human beings. And so, a part of my day-to-day experience is worrying clearly about the Queens community of faculty, staff, and students, but it's worrying about my aging parents. It's worrying about my mom that's in a nursing home that can't be visited right now, in New Jersey. All of these things are influencing us day to day. And so it is now more than ever that we have to pull together as people that care about each other as professionals, that give us the space to listen and to support each other, not only in our work, but to be responsive to the moments of their personal needs. The last 3 weeks have just been unprecedented. We have been at Queens trying to be agile, trying to be one step somewhat ahead of the curve of this evolving challenge and crisis and pandemic. I am so happy to be here in the Queens community, a community that I fell in love with from afar, and now that I've been here for 9 months, I know why. It's a community that really cares about each other. They care about its people, and they've been caring about me and my experience and the experience of my senior leadership team. I love those. As I said earlier, when times were normal, I loved the senior leadership team meeting. Right, I love spending that 3 hours together and learning what was going on across campus. And you know what? Almost every day is another crisis senior leadership team meeting to address myriad concerns, questions, policy changes, and to do the type of risk mitigation and decision making that's required by these times. And I've got a great senior leadership team. We have experts in what they do. We always are checking our egos at the door, and we come in with an open mind to different advice and suggestions, and we care about each other. We made a joke. We're all doing the Brady Bunch here, and whatever platform, Zoom, Ring Central, we're a Ring Central place. And the best times of my day when I'm not worried about the world, when I'm not worried about my family, when I'm not worried about our students, is the time when we're doing the work, when we're literally spending that time together, making decisions. And then, we kind of got to get into our own silos and islands to execute on those decisions. So, it's been a real a study, and I, I still have mentors, right? I'm still in communication with Dan Porterfield. I'm still in communication with David Green. And I'm thankful every day for the leadership that they modeled and that I learned at their leadership tables. And had I not had those experiences, boy, I would not be as good of a leader for Queens right now. I just wouldn't be as prepared as I think we are as a leadership team to handle this in the best ways that we can.
I want to ask, I mean, one of the great things about higher education broadly is how collaborative it is. And you've mentioned many good mentors, I think, even in my situation, and I appreciate your comments about, my company. I mean, there are other CEOs in Boston tech companies that I'm texting back and forth with constantly because nobody has the right answer. And so just getting, different perspectives can help shape, even if it ends up being your gut feel. Our college presidents, I mean, are you all texting each other all the time? I mean, is that kind of the community you have, or is it a tighter group of mentors? I mean, who are the crew that you're in touch with right now as you all try to navigate some really big decisions with very incomplete information?
Yeah, no, I think that there's quite a bit of communication going on, and I think college presidents are paying more attention to that cross communication than they typically usually pay attention to it. That is informal with the relationships that you make in the surrounding community. I'm excited to communicate with Clay Armbruster at Johnson C. Smith, with my peers at UNC Charlotte, at Davidson, Carol Quillen, Phil Dubois. That extends out, across the country to my network of folks who, I guess as we age, we've kind of moved up the ladder. But also importantly, the member, the CICs, the NCICUs, I honestly didn't, read every single email from those organizations every morning. Now I do. Now the data that we're sharing together across our conference, as the South Atlantic Conference has a weekly call of its presidents to really share experiences and best practices. So there's a great moment of collaboration and a spirit of true sharing of experience, of not seeing us so much as competitors in this moment, but as folks that are taking on a common front and a common enemy, which is this pandemic. And it's horrible that we've been forced into this posture, but it's actually really beautiful about the people that are stepping up in ways to help each other to make our community stronger.
Dan, I can't thank you enough in the midst of all of that for taking time with us. One closing thought, I want to be sensitive of time, is our audience are primarily advancement professionals. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say most of whom have not dreamed of becoming a college president. But my question for you is, should more advancement leaders think about that as a why not aspirational path? And if so, what advice would you give them as they think about building their own portfolio of work?
I definitely think that more advancement professionals that have a passion for leadership, that truly love their institutions, and not necessarily their institutions, that love the industry of higher education and are really fixated on learning more about our industry. I think development professionals bring a skill set that is becoming increasingly more important and more essential to a successful college presidency. There is no question that on the other side of this pandemic, an industry that was starved for resources is going to be more starved for resources. So I would be encouraging for folks that see higher education as a field that is really so important to the future of our world. And if you want to build a portfolio that leads with the fundamentals of advancement and development, I think you have every right to aspire towards that future career. The steps that you need to take are going to be very, very individual. It depends on where you come from. It depends on what your professional experiences have been. I do think it's key for you to get to that senior leadership table. And if you have a deep, deep experience in advancement, learning another lane, I think, makes a lot of sense. How many hats can you wear, right? How can you expand your portfolio to demonstrate, some mastery of a broader slice of the pie of institutional leadership? But I would be very, very encouraging for folks that love the work of advancement, the work of connecting people that believe in higher education to the mission of an institution. They have a world of potential as a college president.
Dan, this has been incredibly inspiring for me, and I know it will be for our audience as well. Thank you for giving us a window into your journey from Saint Croix to Charlotte, and I wish you the absolute best in navigating these turbulent times, and I appreciate your willingness to share. Thank you, best wishes, and take care.
Thank you, Brent. You take care of your family and your team there, and we will be stronger on the other side of this. Thank you.